Welcome to the Mycelium Network podcast, a podcast all about early stage web developers and the mentors and teachers that help them along the way. Hey, Andy. Thanks so much for joining me for the Mycelium Network podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be able to do this.
Yeah, I'm really glad you agreed to do it, because I know I had to convince you a little bit.
I definitely am an introvert, and I don't really like the limelight.
Yeah, no, me too. And I've said it before. I don't know why I keep putting myself in situations that generally I shouldn't enjoy. Maybe I'm trying to force myself out of the situation, but I do enjoy a good conversation. So I think that's more what it's about.
Me too.
And so I think what I'm interested in a couple of things, and I sent you some notes, but I think one of the things with you that is unique from anybody else that I've had a conversation with so far is you have a really long history in tech. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things that you can share. And I'm also curious for us to kind of juxtapose when you started and now where you've kind of like trying to get back into the world of tech, but in maybe a different industry than you were, and how things have changed, what's gotten better, what's gotten worse, what's stayed the same. So I think before we dive into any specific topic, if you can kind of give us a bit of a background of who you are, where you are today, and some of the history.
My childhood was really pretty standard and unremarkable, but I was always interested in science and mathematics and tinkering with gadgets and electronics, and I mean those things always fascinated me. So when I got to college, computers hadn't really become an area of study yet. And I kind of had two college careers. I went for a couple of years right out of high school, and I couldn't really decide what to do. Nothing really seemed interesting. I couldn't get excited about any of the subjects. So I quit and actually worked in a factory for a couple of years driving a forklift. After about a year of that, I thought, well, I don't really want to be doing this when I'm 50. So I thought it's probably a good idea to maybe go back to college and find something that I could be interested in that would be a little bit more fun career. So I transferred, got back into college as a junior. And the way I got into computing is a little bit different. It wasn't really something that was on my radar, but I was actually majoring in chemistry. I'd always liked chemistry and in school and everything. So I was majoring in chemistry, and there was one quarter that I needed a chemistry class that wasn't being offered, and so I needed something to fill up my schedule. I went to talk to my advisor. And I said, I need to have a full schedule because I don't want to waste any time. And he said, well, you might want to take this Fortran course. He said it'll fit into a Bachelor of Science degree really well. And I still remember exactly what he said. He said to me, computers probably aren't going to go away. And so I thought, well, I still wasn't totally convinced. So I did go and sign up for the course. I went to the first day of class. The professor seemed like a pretty nice guy. It was a large class, introductory to Fortran. I did not buy the book right away because I wasn't sure I was going to keep the class. So the first day of class went pretty well. So after the second day of class, I actually went and bought the book. I still have the book somewhere. It's in one of the boxes that have followed me around. And on the third day, after the third day of class, I went to the administration building changed my major to computer science, and the rest is history, as they say. But when I started doing computer science in college, we were using punch cards instead of terminals. So I had to go to the bookstore and buy, they had vending machines actually in the computing center where you could buy a package of 100 punch cards for like $1 or something. And for the first, for my first course, I think I probably got most of them out of the vending machine. But pretty soon after the second or third course, I thought, well, it'll be just easier and cheaper to go to the bookstore and start buying them in the big boxes of 1,000 cards, and so that's what I did. And not too long after that, then they did install some terminals, and they set up a machine to do time sharing of the IBM 370, which everything ran on. So I mean, from punch cards to today is just a stark difference. I mean, you can't even imagine what that difference is like unless you were there and lived it. And I'll give you an example of what was really one of the things that's really different today. From punch cards, we had what were called IBM 029 card punch machines, and you would put a deck of cards in the machine. It had a hopper that would feed one card at a time. You tap the return key to get to bring the first card into the machine where you can start punching it. And as you touch the keys, it actually punched the holes in the card. So there was no such thing as a delete. I mean, there was no backspace. Once you hit the key, the hole was in the card, and if you had made a mistake, you just push return, threw that card away, and start it again. So if you stood in the card punch room and listened a little bit, you could tell how far into the card each person was, because at the beginning of a card you'd be typing pretty quickly, but as you got to about 40 or 50 characters in, people would slow way down because they didn't want to make a mistake after having done 40 or 50 or 55 characters. And today, of course, I absolutely rely on the backspace key. If we didn't have backspace key, I'd have to do something else. I type okay, but I'm not as accurate as I would like to be. So if it wasn't for backspace, I would be much less productive in programming. But another of the really big differences, I of course started with Fortran, and in school I did Fortran, COBOL, IBM 360 and 370 assembly language, a little bit of Pascal, but not very much. And Ada wasn't really on the horizon yet, and Java hadn't even been conceived of. So never dealt with that in school. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with Fortran, but in Fortran especially, we were mostly using Fortran 66, which was the 1966 standard. And the first 5 spaces on a line were the line number, and you didn't have to have a line number, but that's where they went if you had one. The 6th column was the continuation column, that if any character in that meant that this line was a continuation from the previous line, and everything started in column 7. And you just had to remember that. It wasn't, there also was no integrated development environment or language sensitive editors or any of that. I mean, you just had to know that. And so the tools today are so much better and so friendly to, I think, especially new developers learning a new language, or new developers using something like VS Code, and you install the plugin that when you start typing the name of a function or something like that, it basically will show you a list of what could go next. And so you don't really even have to remember all of the names of everything, which is helpful, I think, to everybody. It is certainly for me because there's just so many more things available today than there were back then. In my professional life, I used DEC VAX computers for the most part, and using the VT100 or equivalent terminals, and of course we'd never use punch cards as for when I was working for pay. But I got pretty good with the editors on the VT100s. They had the keypad editing, which was great. But even that could not hold a candle to the modern IDEs. I mean, VS Code or the JetBrains tools or things like Eclipse or I think there's what's called NetBeans. I used many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They all are just great. The languages also being more available. When I first got out of school, of course, I was working 8 hours a day. And then I had a computer at home, and I'd come home and I'd spend all day working at a computer, come home, grab something to eat, and then spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours at night also working on a computer. But if you wanted to buy a compiler or assembler, I mean, they were a few $100s each, and the tools were either non-existent or very expensive. So today with things like VS Code being basically free. You can download Visual Studio if you're using it for an open source project or a personal project. You don't have to pay for that. If you're trying to learn, that's great because you can learn it without spending too much money. Node.js, you just download. Python, you just download. So the availability and quality of the tools is really one of the stark contrast between now and say the mid to late 1980s. What else? I'm trying to think. What else comes to mind that's a big contrast.
I mean, I think
the computers of.
Sorry, I was just thinking
I was
about
computers, of course, have gotten much faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just thinking like, where you mentioned the fact that in like modern code editors, if you like start typing, it'll like show you a list of potential like functions that's applicable even to the specific. It can detect what kind of object you have on the left hand side, so it'll only suggest like functions that's actually available on that. Like if it's an array, it won't suggest something that's only available on a string and that kind of thing. So even that, like they're calling telesense. But then over and above that, like more often than not, when you hover over one of these specific function calls or whatever, it'll show you like integrated documentation that's like usually pulled from MDN or something. So even that's being brought into the editor. And then I'm wondering like this next evolution where you get stuff like GitHub's Copilot, where it sometimes suggests like, here's potentially the entire function that you probably want to write based on code analysis. What do you think about that coming into, like, it's almost like a pair programmer that's based on machine learning?
I have not experienced that yet. I've read a little bit about it. That to me also, a few years ago they were talking about AIs beginning to write code, and they were going to be so much more efficient and effective than human programmers. But that hasn't really come to fruition. So I guess I'm a little skeptical that that's really going to come about in a major and be a major factor. One of the things that they've also has been kind of in and out of the news over the past 30, 35 years is this idea that we're going to have these libraries of reusable components, And to build a system, you just grab some components, write a little bit of interface code, stick them together and ship them out the door. And we haven't gotten there yet either. And to me, I think the reason that that hasn't worked is because when humans solve problems, we don't always necessarily do it in a strictly procedural way by following a certain sequence of steps. We'll use intuition, which I don't know how you would teach a machine to have intuition. We use experience, what has worked or not worked before. We use the knowledge that we've gained, and one of the things that I've always found interesting when I've had the need or the situation where I needed to use recursion, and I've written several functions that in C that were recursive, and when you need a recursive function, almost nothing else will do, because you think of writing this 15 or 20 line function that, since it can call itself, you don't need to write too much more. But if you had to write it out procedurally and do it, calling a function and calling another, it would be very untenable pretty quickly. So how do you know when you should use recursion? Well, it's one of those things where you're trying to solve a problem, and then you think, this probably lends itself to a recursive function. And then you start looking at it a little bit more, and you start writing the recursive function, and in maybe 10 or 15 or 20 lines of code, you've got this function that does this thing that you can't really keep in your mind, because you can't iterate as deeply in your brain and keep everything straight as the computer can, pushing stuff on the stack and just iterating and getting deeper and deeper. And one of the things that I've always been surprised at when I've written recursive functions is I never knew that I was almost done until I was done. Because I'd be writing along, and it'd be kind of working and calling itself, and I'd be using the debugger to watch it. And then all of a sudden I'd realize, oh, that's it, it's finished, and now it works. And, I never really knew when I was approaching that point. Whereas with procedural type functions, you pretty much knew, when you were almost done with the function, you just had a few more things to do, and you can move on and work on something else. So it's fun, but I don't know how you get a machine to do that, or how you create a set of components that you can pick from, and without really studying it and getting into it, that you need a recursive component rather than just some procedural component. And that's another thing that's changed since I first started getting into computing. Is nobody had ever heard about object-oriented programming when I first started. So everything was very procedural, very functional. You wrote functions or subroutines in Fortran and called them, and you pushed arguments on the stack, and so there wasn't really this concept of an object that you were working with. It was all basically arrays. And then in C, of course, C introduced the concept of the structures and the what do they call them? Where it could it's been so long since I've written any C. There was a way to have an area in memory that if you addressed it one way, it was like one set of variables or one record format, or if you called it by another name, it was I think it's a joint or join, or that's join is a database thing. But depending on which name you called it by, you could use a separate set of variables within the same memory of region of memory. And that was great if you were reading records from a text file and you didn't know what the next record was going to be. You know what the different formats were. Say you had 5 or 6 different possible record types, and you'd read the record in, but you didn't know what type it was till you looked at the first 4 bytes, and you say, "Oh, this is this is a certain type of record," and so you would say, "Well, that's going to be, I'm going to call that, you know, A or whatever," and it would then you'd use that until you get to the next record, and it might be a different type. And I wish I could remember what the name of that was. I'll look it up later and send you a
Yeah.
message so that maybe you can go back and edit it in or something. Um, but object-oriented programming, and it took me a long time to get comfortable with objects because like having grown up and learned in a very functional procedural manner. It wrapping my brain around objects took a while, and by a while I mean probably a few years at least, because it just I guess I like everything else in life, we have a resistance to change. So I wanted to
Yeah.
do things the way I knew how to do them. I didn't want to change to this new thing. But then I finally did see the light, and I woke up one day and thought, this isn't so bad. Maybe I'll try this after all. But those are, I think that the availability and quality of the tools, especially like you mentioned, the context sensitive editors where it can tell you what the function name could be or whatever, and object oriented programming is different. And a year or two ago, I heard some people talking about this new thing called functional programming, where they were using subroutines and functions, and I thought, that's not new. That's that's the old way. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty popular in the JavaScript world. I know a lot of people are suggesting that might be better than because I mean you can fake object-oriented programming in JavaScript, and to some, I mean JavaScript technically has class syntax, but it's not true class syntax. In the Java sense, for example. But through that, you can sort of create this idea of classes and inheritance and all these kinds of things. And more so if you go for something like TypeScript. Then you can probably get closer to true object-oriented. But I do find that a lot of folks are leaning more towards functional programming, and there's some stuff built into JavaScript that lends itself to that, like your map reduce filters functions that you have on arrays. So you're not actually changing the underlying array. You're doing some function, you're running some functions on the contents of it and creating a new array. But the old one is still left intact. And I think that is what they call having functions that have no side effects. So if you give it the same thing, it'll always give you the same result. There's no surprises. So it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, we go forward and then we step back a little bit, and then we go forward and then we step back a little bit. I think the same thing happened with Jamstack, where, I mean, some aspects of Jamstack is new, but the underlying idea behind it is pretty much like we used to build websites back in the early 2000s, where it's nothing more than just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that sits on a server, and it's just pushed to your browser. Of course, with the modern capabilities of browsers and stuff, you have all kinds of stuff you can do then on top of that to enhance the experience, like making stuff available offline, being able to respond to different screen sizes and environments and all that kind of stuff. But the basic idea of serving static pages, that's something that happened way back in the day. And now it's again evolving. Now it seems like people are kind of like still interested in Jamstack, but now they're embracing this new thing of edge functions and serverless, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around exactly what that all means.
Yeah, me too. These serverless functions I haven't really looked into that deeply. I've read a little bit about them in the context of the Microsoft Azure offerings, but I haven't really tried anything with them. But what you're talking about just a minute ago, and with JavaScript, I mean, we used to call that back in the day either calling something by value or by reference. I mean, if you
Yeah.
call it by value, you change its value perhaps, or not. You don't change. If you pass by value, then you can't change the value because you don't know where it's stored in memory. So you just have to return something else. But if you pass something by reference, then you have the pointer to where it's located, so you can actually change the thing that's being passed. And I always thought that was pretty cool. But I wanted to say something about JavaScript. And I like JavaScript. I've written a fair bit of it. In fact, last year I don't know if you're familiar with the Advent of Code. It's a set of problems that this guy does every year for the first 25 days of December. And the problems
Oh.
get more and more challenging as you go through the 25 days. And there are two parts each day. And I used JavaScript last year to do that. Got reasonably far into it before I kind of threw my hands up and said, well, I both don't have time to work on this all day long, and the problems were getting like really complicated, and I just thought, well, I'll do this again next year. But I also wanted to learn JavaScript. But the more I've learned JavaScript, um, and you know, when you're talking about the different ways to do things in JavaScript, I'm almost always reminded of a quote that I read. I used to actually had it a copy of it pinned up to my wall when I was working. Um, and I wish I still had it, but and I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But the effect of the quote was, you know, when you're writing code, you're not trying to tell the computer what to do. What you're trying to do is tell other programmers what you're doing, or maybe even remind yourself 6 months from now why you did what you did and why you did it this way. And
Yeah.
you know that is so true, because the code that I've written in C, you know, I would do a project, get finished with it, put it away. Maybe 6, 8 months or a year later, you know, the guy that I wrote it for would come back and say, hey, you know, we've got another set of data, but now we've got this different kind of quirk. And hey, can you get that code out and add in enough to do this and then process it? I did lots of what's called data reduction and analysis and processing.
Okay.
And so I'd say, yeah, sure, I can do that. And I would take out, you know, I'd go find the file and edit it. And sometimes, especially early on, I mean, I would look at the code and I'd be like, you know, who wrote this? You know, and why do they hate me? Because it was foreign.
Yeah.
So that encouraged me to both start writing better comments in the code, and also to start doing things in really the simplest way possible. Even if there was a clever way of doing something, I would think, if I ever have to come back and look at this, am I going to be able to figure out in the future how clever I was today? Not that I'm all that clever of a person, but you know, sometimes I would think about, you know, kind of a cool way of doing something. And in my opinion, the simplest way to get the job done, as long as it's not horribly inefficient, is probably the way you want to do it. Because when you go look at it later, or if some person that's maintaining the code looks at it a year from now, they'll be able to figure out what it is you were doing relatively quickly, maybe, and they'll be able to maintain it or update it or use it in a way that will be effective for them. And JavaScript, every time I look at a book on JavaScript, it's like, there really are too many different ways to do any one thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, and as JavaScript has evolved, things have improved. But it used to be like the asynchronous communications with JavaScript. It was the try and catch, and then they at some point they introduced the promises, and I don't know what they're up to now. But and you want to use the way that works the best. I mean, you don't want a lot of network congestion, but you also want to use code that's going to be understandable. And JavaScript gives you plenty of ways to just really get out there where you will never come back. It's almost it's got too many ways of doing things, whereas Fortran had too few ways of doing stuff. C had about the right amount, if you ask me, but then I have a special place in my heart for C language. It's I really enjoyed but both the years, the time in my life, and C programming were all very good to me. So I remember that very fondly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, JavaScript has evolved quite a bit in the last couple of years. Not all of it necessarily for the better. I think there's been a lot of syntactic sugar added to the language, and I'm not always sure if it's good for new people. I think a lot of it can be super confusing. Like, for example, you can create a function using the function keyword, but you can also create a variable and store a function in it where you use the fat arrow syntax. And the thing is, it's not actually exactly the same thing.
Right.
They're both functions that has a call signature that you can call, but the value of the this keyword in a function defined with the function keyword and with arrow functions is not the same. Like, this keyword in JavaScript has been problematic in the past, and they essentially fixed it in arrow functions. But now it's important that people know the difference. And so in a way they fixed it, but in a way now you have to adopt one of the two, because otherwise you're going to potentially confuse yourself, because you're going to say, okay, cool, I can just do this dot blah. And then suddenly you're in a functions context and it doesn't work. And you're, but why the heck is it not working? And it's literally just because the value of this is different. And there's some other syntactic sugar things as well. I think one of the recent additions is this ability, I forget the name, but so essentially instead of having to do if this thing and then do a chain, like say if variable and variable dot something else property, then do this thing. Now you can do variable and then you put a little question mark and then a dot and then the other property. And that's like a shortcut for it. And it's not always obvious what the heck that question mark does. I'm pretty sure if people new to code looks at that, it's not going to be immediately intuitive that that's actually checking. It'll only try and read the property on the right if the thing on the left exists. So if thing on the left is undefined, it's not going to try and read the thing. So it won't throw an error saying cannot read length of undefined. You avoid that. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that syntax is very intuitive, that is what it's doing.
It's not intuitive. I know what you're talking about. And the first time I saw that, I thought, that's it's really nice that you can avoid, the problems with undefined variables. But is it really better than checking to see if something is defined first and then doing it in an if statement? Is it really worth saving 2 lines of code to do this very kind of complex, different looking construct? And
Hmm.
and that just I'm not sure where I fall on that because I haven't had an occasion where I've written that type of construct yet. So I mean maybe
Hmm.
it is, but and also when going back to functions, the anonymous functions in JavaScript gave me
Hmm.
fits at first. I mean it, I found them kind of difficult to construct at first, and probably would have a problem with them now because I haven't written JavaScript very much recently. But my understanding is that the anonymous functions have the advantage that once they're used and they're out of scope, they're no longer taking memory, which is probably a good enough rationale to use them when you can. Um, but they certainly can be confusing.
They're also hard to debug because
Mm.
if something happens in your code, it doesn't have a name to reference because it's
Right,
anonymous, right? So it
right.
can't tell you function with this name is where the error occurred. It's more going to have to try and tell you on which line it happened.
Well,
And
then,
then
yep,
you're on your own there.
yeah. Then you go back to the tried and true age-old method of debugging of putting in print statements to say, okay, hey, I
Hmm.
passed this line, and now I'm at this line, and now I'm at this line, and this variable is now this and this and this, and um, symbolic debuggers were also just an incredible advancement in debugging. Um,
Mm.
it really beats the endless endless number of print statements that you have to put in to figure things out.
That's true, but at the same time, I wonder how approachable they are because I still find more often than not people using console.log or console.error or whatever to figure out what the heck's going on, other than flipping open the developer tools and using the script debugger in there. Um, I very rarely work with somebody that's like uses that as opposed to using just console log statements. Um, like me myself, I mostly use console log. I I've always mean to study like these things because I know that if you know how to use it well, it's probably going to serve you better and save you time. But you need to make time to learn it because it's those things are pretty complex.
It is. You're quite correct, and I think that there's a tipping point in there that if you've got a small section of code that you're working with and you need to figure something out that's not terribly complex and you're not um, deep into a 3 or 4 dimensional array, yeah, putting a
Hmm.
console log or print statement or something like that, that's kind of the first line of defense. But very quickly, if that doesn't show me where the problem is, I am much quicker these days to open the developer tools, go in there, or and see with Visual Studio to open the debugger and just start working through it because being able to set breakpoints and watch variables and see
Hmm.
exactly what is in memory without having to put in statements that you then have to go back and take out or comment out is
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
it's almost magical what debuggers can do today. And I
Yeah.
would say I would encourage anybody. Yeah, I mean a couple of console log statements or print statements in Python or something. If that gets the job done, that's fine. But it's you'll do yourself a favor if you start learning the debugging tools because they can really not only can they show you what the problem is, but sometimes they can also illuminate other issues with the same code that you might not see until you get to a boundary condition. And
Mm,
that, that I think also is valuable.
yeah, yeah. I wonder if one of the reasons people haven't adopted these as much is maybe a lack of educational material in this area. Because, I mean, not that I've really dug deep for this, but I haven't really I mean, I see a lot of news about what's happening in the developer world, and nothing like this has really come across my radar, where there's this, like, oh, there's this course by X on using the debugger tools in Chrome, for example. That's really amazing, and you should take it, and you'll never use console log again. I've never really seen that. Um, so I wonder if that's an area of opportunity in the educational space.
I think you're exactly right, and that's probably one of the things that the Mycelium network could help people with. And I mean,
Yeah.
the group that you've created, I think is fantastic. It's a good idea. It's helpful to people at multiple different levels of experience and learning. And that I think would be a good venue for helping people at least to start using the tools that are available. And you're exactly right. Everything that I know about, especially the developer tools in Chrome or Edge or Firefox, I've learned just by poking around, or I've looked on one of the done a search on, and the name is escaping me. It's one of the sites where everybody goes to ask programming questions, and I can't
Oh,
think of it.
Stack Overflow?
Stack Overflow, yes, indeed. Um, I'll go there and have say, hey, how do I do? Search how do I do this? I seldom ask questions because almost always I'm able to find somebody else's question that's very similar, and I can figure it out from there. But people will say, well, if you open the developer tools and go to this pane and do this, you'll see, it'll show you that. And I think, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. So I go try it, and hey, that really works well. And I kind of file that away. And the next time I need to use something like that, I hopefully remember that I can go to the developer tools and look at that. And I do that with CSS all the time. I mean, when I'm working on a website or working on CSS, I invariably have the developer tools open to the CSS that's being actually the CSS that's being applied, and being able to tweak the CSS and see the change immediately it is so much better than change it, try it, change it, try it. Yeah, it's such a time saver. And I use Edge. I use I'm not a Microsoft fanboy, but I like Microsoft better than I did in the '80s. I can tell you that since
Yeah,
Satya
for sure.
Nadella
For
took
sure.
over, it's a different company in my opinion. But we won't go down
I
that
agree.
road. Um, but with the Edge tools in VS Code and the way that what is it that um, it's not really a server. It's kind of the server that you can, it's a plugin that you can get for VS Code that opens Edge and runs your code in it. Um, and I didn't know this before I did it, but I realized one day that when I was changing the CSS in in the panel on the developer tools, it was actually changing it back in my source file. And so I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. If I find out what I like, I don't even have to go back. I just kind of double check, look, make sure that it's there, and I'm good to go. So that's, we're getting there. I don't think we're at the utopia yet, but it's things are a lot better than they were even, even 10 years ago, or more. And my first experience with web development was in the very late 90s. You may recall that people were worried about the Y2K problem and the conversion
Yeah.
of the dates and everything. And one of the things that I was working on was a project to make sure that we were ready for Y2K. And so I developed a website to track some of the issues, and that was before JavaScript even, and there were no real databases. So those were the days of the CGI scripts, and I was writing
Yeah, I remember them.
C code
Mm-hmm.
and putting it in the CGI directory, and then doing the calls. And I couldn't even do that today. I'd have to learn how to do it again, but it was people think, well, those were the days. Well, those were the days, but I don't want to go back there because what we have now is so much better, that it's you can remember fondly that you did that, but I don't like. It's like I grew up in the southern part of the United States, the southeastern part, and it was fairly warm in the summertime, and for the first several years of my life, we didn't have air conditioning. And
Mm-hmm.
so, once we got air conditioning, I don't want to go back to a time without air conditioning. Even though I don't live that far south now, it still gets pretty warm and somewhat humid here. So, I like my air
Yeah.
conditioning. I fondly remember, hey, we got by without it, but I don't want to go back there.
Yeah. 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 I do think the CSS tools are much more approachable than the JavaScript debuggers.
Mm.
Um, but again, I think it's maybe just a lack of knowledge and a lack of educational material. Maybe they are just as approachable. It's obviously a completely different paradigm,
Mm.
but a lot of it translates like the same way which you can see, oh, this CSS is being applied to this element. You can see, oh, at this point, this variable has this value. And I'm pretty confident you'll be able to change the value and see the impact of it in that. I think one of the tricky things with these debuggers, and again, it's probably an educational thing, but with the use of frameworks, I think oftentimes it's a little tricky to avoid stepping into the code that is actually part of the framework and being completely lost.
Yeah.
And then having to dig your way out of the framework code back to where it's again the code that you wrote to get to the problem. But again, because you have step into, step over, and all those kinds of things. So it's understanding when do you want to step into, when do you want to step over, so that you avoid drilling into the stuff. But with that said, I do know that the Chromium dev tools have this ability to exclude certain libraries. So you can say, by the way, anything that's like jQuery, don't go there. So if something would have stepped into the jQuery code, it'll just step over it instead.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's.
I was gonna say I remember back in the late 80s, I was doing something with the Visual Studio, and I was doing some debugging, and I accidentally stepped into one of the dynamic link libraries in Windows, and I was immediately, I had no idea what I was looking at, and of course I didn't have the symbols for that, so it was all just basically Greek. So basically, I started again and made sure I stepped over the next time. But yeah, you're exactly right on that.
Yeah. So to switch it up a little bit, I read that you are really into cars, automobiles, and I know recently you've gotten into motorcycles. But the one thing that when reading the history that you have on one of your blogs, the one thing that's been common throughout that entire line is you would always join these automobile clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, automobile clubs are essentially communities.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, with that in mind, like, what does community mean to you, and what led you to this what can you call it, this pattern of always reaching out, always searching out for a community around the specific interest that you have?
Well, let me tell you what I think community means to me is a group of people that have some common interest or common bond and are willing to both share their knowledge and excitement with others and also help others who maybe don't have as much experience or haven't lived through some of the early part of, like, say, cars in the 60s and 70s being different from today, for example, to help them along to understand maybe some of the changes or whatever. So it's really a community to me is a group of people who are all interested in some topic, helping each other to understand it better and move forward either individually or as a group to improve the topic, if you will, if that's doable, or just to enhance each other's enjoyment of a particular brand of car, type of car, and in the tech industry, being able to ask questions and learn from people who um, have done things, then you need to do this, and you're interested in learning how to do it. But a lot of the documentation, and I'll use Git and GitHub as an example. The documentation can be both very accurate and very unapproachable at the same time. I mean, and when I go back and read some of the documentation that I read a long time ago, now it makes sense, but now I know how to do what it's talking about. And so recently I asked you how do I do this, and you were very gracious and walked me through how to do this thing that I was trying to do, and I had looked at the documentation and it just didn't it just I couldn't figure it out. It didn't make sense. I didn't know why how to put the steps together or what the motivation for doing that was. But having somebody who has experienced that and is willing to say, well, you do it this way because of this, and here is the I think workflow or the flow of
Yeah.
anything is not immediately apparent when you're working on something that's new to you. You don't see the overall picture. You see the piece of it that you're working on right now. And so having somebody that understands the whole subject or all of the workflow is just invaluable. And I think that's part of being part of a community. And the reason that I personally, just for me, seek out those types of communities is because as an extreme introvert, I just I have no ability to engage in small talk. I mean, it just exhausts me trying to chat with people about nothing. I mean, I've gone to parties, that didn't really have a theme or anything that everybody was interested in. It was just, hey, let's get together and have a party, and after about 10 minutes, I'm thinking, well, this I could be doing something else. And it's
Yeah.
just, we're not talking about anything that I'm interested in, so I'm just going to leave now. So in order to have a community, I seek out people that have that I share a common interest with, and of course, the more interests that I share with a person or a group of people, the better that is, because that gives me more points of connection, if you want to look at it that way. And so that has been the internet age has really been a good thing for me because I've been able to connect with folks who I would never have known if it weren't for some group or and when the way that I first got exposed to Discord, I one of the things that I do I play some video games on both consoles and PC. But I play Final Fantasy 14 off and on. I'm not on every day, but when I got to a certain point in that, I wasn't making much progress because I wasn't sure what to do next. So I kind of sought out a community, and somebody said, "Well, why don't you join this Discord server?" And there's a bunch of people there, and I thought, well, I don't even know what Discord is. So I looked it up and signed up and joined the server, and the folks there were great. I put a question, and um, within minutes, usually somebody had said, well, you should maybe look at this or try this or whatever. And I went from not having any idea what to do to having almost too much information on it, and so that's kind of the other side of the coin. Um, but the communities that I've been able to find on the internet in general, but Discord specifically, have been quite helpful, and it allows and also as an introvert, it allows me to control the amount of interaction. So if I get to a point where I'm just I can't do it anymore, I can sort of walk away from the computer or just stop reading it for a little while, and it allows me to read something, read an answer that somebody's provided, and then think about that. And I don't, it's asynchronous. I don't have to respond right away. I can take my time to internalize it, think about it, decide what my approach is or what my thought is, and then I can reply if it's necessary. So that has been very good. Whereas in face to face meeting or communication, and I'm not against that. I mean, I can do that. It's just I don't, I'm sure you've been in meetings where it's to all but one person in the meeting. It's clear that we're done. It's time to go. We're finished with this. But there's this one person who just keeps
Yeah.
they just can't stop. And so I find really frustrating. So I can do the in-person meetings, but in in-person meetings, people tend to expect a response pretty quickly, and I don't always have a response quickly, especially if it's a question or something that I need to think about for a while. And so online communities are just great for that because I can look at something and read it, and somebody's got a question. I think, well, I kind of understand what they want, but I'm not sure how to phrase it. So I'll go away for a while, and it sits in the back of my mind, and then later on I'll come back and say, oh yeah, I can. This is the way I want to put this, and I type the message to them, and it makes sense, and it helps them, and that's wonderful. I mean, I enjoy helping people, and I want to help be as good to people and help them as much as I can. But sometimes I have to think about how to do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I completely understand it. I also like the asynchronous means of communication. I hate it in a meeting if somebody puts you on the spot to estimate a timeline or to give an answer to something. It's like, don't put me on the spot like that. I need to think about this. Otherwise, I'm gonna say something and then I'm gonna probably regret it. And like at some of these, for one of the clients that I've worked for a long time, they have these all hands meetings where like everybody comes together, and like I oftentimes have to excuse myself and go to my hotel room just for a while just to decompress, because I can only social so much, and then I need to decompress.
Well, and the more people you have in a room at the same time, especially a meeting about something, um, the more avenues of communication you have. So you're trying to deal with all of that. You're trying to maintain the lines of communication to each of the other people in the room. And when
Mm-hmm.
you have too many people, you just really can't do that. So um, they used to one of the projects that I was on. They used to have these like week-long meetings. I mean, they would get people from all over the place, and we'd sit in a big conference room, and there'd probably be 40 or 45 people in there, and it was just all day long for all week, and so little would get done because everybody wanted to have their voice heard and put their 2 cents in. And I thought, if you would just break this down into its component issues and then have the people meet that have a vested interest in that issue, get those people together, the three or four or five of them, let them, hash it out for an hour or so. They'll come up with a solution. But in a room of 40 people, it's really difficult to do that. And then somebody had in another project, uh, they had an epiphany and said, hey, when we have meetings, we're not going to sit down. We're gonna we're gonna stand up during the whole meeting, and that kind of focused people's thoughts, because instead of sitting there eating donuts and drinking coffee, they're
Yeah.
standing there, and people get tired of kind of standing up doing nothing. So it was that was helpful. So being able to focus is an art form in some sense, and it's necessary to get real work done. I mean, if you just want to stand around and chat for a while, that's fine. But if you want to solve a problem, you need to focus on the problem, get inputs from people who have who are stakeholders, who have a vested interest in that problem, and then find something that will work for the majority or all of those people. And
Yeah. Yeah.
large meetings make that difficult.
That's for sure. Yeah. So, when you talked about how things have improved in terms of like the languages that's available to us, the tooling that's available to us, and how the industry has moved on, and like how you used to be able to work. I also think about stuff like in the past, if you wanted to learn something, you had to go to the bookstore and buy a book, and they were very expensive. Unless you had a library that had a really good collection of books, you had to like save up and go buy that book. These days, of course, that's almost unheard of. Like you just do a quick search and you find a thing, or you find an online course, or you use like institutions like Stanford with their open curriculum, and the access to information is just incredible. But with all of that, I saw you mention in one of your posts about the movie Hidden Figures. And what's been highlighted in there is this role that women and underrepresented people actually played in something as monumental as the moon landing and all of these kinds of things. And so I'm wondering, like, with all of this improvement that's happened, do you think like the quality of software has actually improved in step with all these other improvements that we've had? And secondly, in general, do you think that the tech industry has really improved as much as you would have thought it would, seeing that we have had all of these like underlying enhancements and improvements to the way we work and the languages and the tools we have access to?
I think the quality of software in general has improved. Um, it still got a ways to go, but some of the testing approaches that are being used now, I think, are making software more reliable than it was. And I mean, the thing that I would point to on that is, the difference between, let's say, Windows 3 and Windows 11. You know, and I remember Windows version 3 and 3.311 specifically because that was the one where they added the networking capability. Um, but it was probably multiple times a day. I was, doing a hard reset on the machine because it got into some state where it was no longer paying any attention to the mouse or anything. So, you just if you can
Mhm.
reach the big red switch, you turn it off, wait a second, turn it back on and start over. And that does occasionally still happen, but not nearly at the rate that it did in the mid 90s. I would say these days, I mean, my primary machine stays on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, I log out, close the lid of the laptop, turn the monitor off at night. But it'll run for sometimes weeks at a time. And the only reason I reboot it is because there's an update that requires a reboot. So I think the quality of some software has improved. It's not really consistent across the board. Some shops have done a much better job at improving their quality than others, but that's just the human condition. I mean, some brands of automobiles are much more reliable than others. So, um, that's just kind of the way things work. Um, as far as making progress in treating people more equitably and having um, a wider representation of people in the field. Um, I wish we had made more progress in that. I have worked with all different types of people from all ethnic backgrounds. Lots of people who did not speak English as a native language. Um, so and I used to one of the projects I was on. I traveled to Germany um, multiple times a year for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and saw what the difference between the culture here and the culture there. And you realize pretty quickly that um, you have to give people grace. Uh, when you go somewhere else, you're necessarily going to be in a different environment, and so you have to be open to differences from what you're used to. And in the think tank that I worked for was an interesting place to work because like 95% of the folks there, the staff members, had at least one PhD, sometimes more than that, and almost all of them were in what I call, and I think most people would refer to as the hard sciences. We had lots of physicists, lots of astrophysicists, mathematicians, statisticians, chemical engineers, that type of thing. And it was mostly white males, but we also had people of color. Um, and not only black and brown people, but also Asians, and I mean pretty much a little bit of everything. We had women who worked there, and I just always try to treat people like I would want to be treated. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I try to just, look, they're a person, they're an individual,
Mm-hmm.
be as accommodating as I can, and help them out, and not be mean or evil or whatever. But and I think that has to do with the way that I was raised, um, more than a conscious decision to be that way. As I mentioned, I grew up in the deep southeast in the United States, in the late 50s and 60s. So I lived through a lot of the stuff that went on during that time. But my father was a civilian employee at a military base. He was civil service and worked as a civilian on a military base, and he was dealing with mostly non-commissioned officers like sergeants and things like that, and they came from all over the place. And so often at Thanksgiving, he would invite one or two of them to come have Thanksgiving with us, because they were in a situation where they couldn't go back to where they were from, and so we would have people from of different ethnicities and different backgrounds, and sometimes radically different belief systems than us. And my parents just always treated them the same as they would treat family. And so I just kind of grew up thinking that you know this is the way you treat people. You treat them um, with compassion, and if they need something, you try to help them. And um, when I got kind of into the real world and realized that not everybody does that, I was saddened by that, because there's no reason for it. I think we need to give people the chance to excel to whatever level they are able to, given their intellectual capacity and their determination, their interest, their motivation. I mean, people are all different, and you know, a lot of people are a lot smarter than me and have been a lot more successful, and hey, that's great. Um, uh, but I don't fault them for that, because they haven't tried to
Yeah.
prevent
Yeah.
me from being what I wanted to be. And so in
Mm-hmm.
turn,
Mm-hmm.
I try to never prevent anyone from attaining what they want to attain. And if I can help them get there, I'm going to do that. I mean, one of the things that I learned from my father, who was a good man, was that if you can help somebody, you do it. You don't pay attention to what color their skin is, or what they believe in, or where they came from, or what sex they are, or whatever. If you can help somebody, you help them. And he did that his entire life. And so I hope that I am like that. I want to think that I am, and I try to be. And so I think if we would all be that way, maybe the world would be a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. No, I totally agree. And I can say from the interactions I've had with you and seen you have with others on the Mycelium network, you're definitely following in the footsteps of your father. So you can you can rest assured of that. um, yeah, no. So I also read your blog where you're detailing your journey of getting back into the tech world and specifically web development. And you had this kind of mantra of sorts that you wrote down that I really liked. And what you wrote was start with the basics, be consistent, write some code every day, and stay focused. I think that's tremendous advice that I would echo to anybody that's getting into any industry really, but especially like in coding, like that is definitely something great. So how's your journey been so far, getting back into the industry and specifically this web development industry?
Well, if I could follow my own advice, I'd probably be doing better. But it's one of those things where you know what you should do, but it's the distance between knowing what you should do and doing it is that there's not always an easy path. And so I would say, I love programming. I mean, I could, when I get immersed in a programming problem and project, um, I can start, and I think it's been 5 minutes, and it's really been 5 hours, and it's just, it's like no time has passed, and I'm sure you've experienced that. But during my career, um, I I got pulled into different aspects of computing, and I'll use computing in a very broad sense, so that after probably 5 or 6 or 7 years of really writing Fortran or C pretty much all day every day, I got into, well, we need somebody to create us a database. And so at the time, I think Ingress was one of the databases that was available on the VAX. And, so I learned the language for that and started, designing things and creating tables and relations and all that. So that was sort of like programming, but not really. And then I started getting pulled into some like system administration type stuff, and I started running some what they used to refer to them as workstations, like Silicon Graphics. We had a couple of Silicon Graphics workstations, the high-end graphics workstations. We had a couple of HP, workstations running HP's version of Unix, and so I got into that, and that was less like programming, but these people were paying me to show up and do what they needed me to do. So they said, "We need you to do this." So I did what they needed me to do. And then it kind of went from there, and I got into doing some what would now be called cybersecurity. They actually sent me to, I don't know if you're familiar with the SANS Institute. You can look them up on
Yep.
SANS.org, but I've taken, they paid for and sent me to take like 5 or 6 of their different courses, and um, security it's necessary, and it's a little bit interesting, but it's not coding. So over the years, I got away from programming, and that's why I got into this to start with. I mean, I told you I went to that Fortran course, and I thought, yeah, this is great stuff. And I started, banging out code, and you'd go to the card reader and read your deck in, and you'd wait, I don't know, an hour or hour and a half or 45 minutes or whatever it was, depending on how busy the computer was. And then your printout would come out, and you'd see the listing and then the error message. Oh, I got, so I got to go back and change this, and you change. And then when it finally runs, it's like an elation. It's one of those small
Yeah.
successes. And I really enjoy that. I like to have code that I've written and run it and see that it works. And man, that's just great. So when I basically retired from full-time work, and I also had a business on the side doing IT management for small businesses in the area where I live. You know, doing network administration and server administration and updates and all that good stuff. And so I finally got most of those clients transitioned to other providers, and I was able to stop doing that. And I thought, well, now I can get back to coding. I want to write some code. And at the time, I looked around and thought, well, writing code today pretty much means websites. It's either WordPress plugins or themes or something of that nature. But it had changed so much from the last time I had done that type of thing, that I was faced with this just overwhelming number of options. And you mentioned your frameworks, and not only frameworks, but languages, and WordPress versus Joomla versus roll your own website, and what is it? MySQL versus MariaDB versus NoSQL databases, or and so it's kind of a bewildering landscape of possibilities. And so I thought, that's where I thought, I've got to concentrate on the basics. I need to figure out what is the kind of basic set of software and skills that I need to work on to be able to do this. And that, to me, that turns out to be HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, and then MySQL typically is very available on most web server providers. So that's what I sort of started concentrating on. And then of course PHP is easy to get access to also, because so many sites are running WordPress. So PHP is almost always available. And so I had to really kind of figure out what pieces I wanted to start with, because I was fairly familiar with HTML back in the early days, but that has changed with HTML5. They've added new tags, and and it's better, but it's a little more to know. And then CSS, I was using inline styling back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But CSS, and now with CSS being able to import other CSS files, that's a good thing. And so it's been a journey. But yeah, trying to stay focused on the basics is also kind of difficult, though, because you hear about some cool new technology, and you want to go look at it and kind of say, well, how could I incorporate this, and what could I do with it? Because it's so new and it's shiny, and and so you want to do that. So it's a challenge to really stay focused. It's also a terrible challenge to write some code every day. I'll say, okay, I gotta start coding. I write some every day, and I'll do that for a while, and then there'll be something that happens. Life happens. There'll be something that I have to go do one day, and I can't get to my coding that day. And when you miss one day, then it's easy to miss another day, and pretty soon you haven't coded anything in 2 weeks, and so it's been challenging, but it's also been it's been fun, because I am fortunate enough not to have to do it as as a money making proposition. I mean, with my wife's retirement, my retirement, and our Social Security and stuff like that. We're not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we're okay. And so,
Yeah.
I'm at the point where if I say, I just don't want to do anything, I'm gonna sit around and read, or just go to the park, take a walk, or go to the beach or whatever. Yeah, I can do that. And a lot of I realize a lot of people, most people aren't in that situation. So and believe me, I realize I've I've got it pretty good. Um, but I still try to maintain some momentum and some motivation, because there's nothing else to keep me motivated right now other than either my self motivation, or if somebody says, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this. I don't know how to do it, or I don't know how to write this function to do this thing. Can you give me a hand?" And that gives me a specific thing to work on, and I find that to be much easier than to find internal motivation to do it. That's why I told you last year I did the Advent of Code, and it's an every year thing. The guy does it every year, and I'll probably do that again this December to to focus my efforts on. I'll probably use JavaScript again, using Node.js to do that, to hone some of those skills and to try to improve in that area, because that gives me a very good focal point. Maybe I'll use Python this year. Anyway, I haven't decided, but you get the idea. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a way to maintain focus and motivation without having to continually come up with something new. And that's the challenge, is finding something interesting to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. That's something I need as well. I can't just, I think I've mentioned it a couple of times from some of the other podcast episodes. Like, I can't just learn something for the sake of learning it. I need an outlet. I need an outlet for it. Otherwise, I either lose interest or I go down rabbit holes that doesn't serve me in any way. So I totally get that. So, in closing, I know you've mentioned that you collect coffee cups. And now I
I do.
partially know why you do that, because you also love coffee.
I
So,
do.
what is it that you like about coffee, and what is some of your favorite coffees?
Um, I like everything about coffee. I like the aroma of the uncooked, or the aroma of the ground beans. I love the aroma of the coffee while it's brewing. I actually like the taste of coffee. I know a lot of people don't. Um, I just I enjoy the warmth of the drink itself. I enjoy uh, the activity that surrounds coffee. I mean, we my wife and I live on a small lake, and we have a patio that with the back of our house faces the lake, and we have this nice patio that's covered. And on nice days, we have a table and chairs there. We can take a cup of coffee out and um, talk about life, the universe, and everything, or read a book or whatever, and have a cup of coffee, and it's just really nice. Um, I tell you what, the coffee that we're buying right now is from a small roaster. I think they're in California. It's called Angelino's Coffee, and it's a family owned and run. I think they do everything from I mean, I think they grow their own beans, and everything from there to the finished ground product. And the reason that we're using them now rather than I was buying a lot of Caribou Coffee, which is a larger manufacturer. I think that's based in Canada.
Okay.
I was using Caribou, and I like their coffees a lot. But we switched to the Keurig machine a couple of years ago, 2 or 3, probably more than that now. I've gotten to the point where caffeine upsets my heart rhythm, so I've had to switch to decaf coffee, and my wife still drinks fully caffeinated coffee, and so rather than making a pot, we have our own coffee pods, and Caribou Creek for a while was great, but then their availability of their K-cup blends was kind of spotty. Green Mountain makes pretty good coffee. We always try to get the dark roast. We prefer the darker roast coffees, and basically anything from Kona in Hawaii. Anything that comes from there is going to be good coffee. The Colombian coffees, but with the coffee that we buy, I take the same approach with that as I try to do with anything else that I can. I try to support small businesses, either local or a family-owned business that somewhere else is selling over the internet. The individual entrepreneur and their family. I think I like to try to support those people to encourage them to continue, and as an encouragement to other would-be entrepreneurs to try whatever it is that they're interested in and provide that. I mean, I think too many people just go to Walmart or whatever the local big store is and buy everything, and they don't think about how that affects the small businesses and the small business owner and the families that have been and that have been doing something for generations, and now they're basically priced out of the market because somebody comes along that can do it 3% cheaper. And a lot of people only think about the cost to them to buy whatever it is they need, and they don't think about the effect on the larger world, and putting some of these people out of business, or their families not being able to make a living from this family business that's been in the family for generations, and now they have to do something else. So I really, it's not always possible, but whenever I can, I try to support a small business. And I think Angelina's. I don't own stock in them. I don't have any advertiser relationship with them or anything like that. But I like their coffee. Their website works really well. It's easy to order and it tastes good, and so we're for the time being we're sticking with them.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm also I've also had to switch to decaf for similar reasons. For me, it's an anxiety thing. Like if the coffee is a little too strong, it does make your heart beat faster, and that can make you anxious if you're prone to being anxious. But yeah, I think that there is definitely something special about coffee. And like you said, the whole ritual of, like, not instant coffee. Like, that's okay, but I like the ritual of, like, I like to buy the beans, and I have like a proper burr grinder, and so I like the sound of it when it grounds the beans, and you have to just find the right setting. Play around with the settings until you find the right thing. And there's so many different ways to brew a cup also. Like, you can have like a Keurig machine, you can have drip coffee, you can have like French press. It's really, really interesting. Yeah, I'm also a coffee lover myself. And I'm glad I'm very glad that decaf exists, because I wouldn't want to have to give up coffee at all. And yeah, we have some companies in South Africa that do the fair trade thing. So therefore, that everybody in the chain of getting the coffee to you is being paid fairly. And I definitely
Right.
do opt to support them over just buying some big brand at the
Oh,
grocery store.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we used to grind our own back when we could both drink coffee with caffeine in it. And I've used French presses. I enjoy that. I've got a little, well, I call it the 1 cup drip coffee maker.
Yeah.
It's actually a little cone-shaped thing that fits on top of a cup of coffee, and you put the coffee in and pour boiling water through. So I've tried all of it. I still like real perked coffee the best. I mean,
Okay.
in an old-fashioned percolator, and I don't have one anymore. The last one that I had just stopped working. It was electric, and I haven't tried to find another one. I will say this, and as kind of a winding down, the URL of my main website is Slow Lane Cafe, and that's I have my email address there. I've owned that domain since sometime in the early to mid '90s. I mean, I registered it when you could first start registering domains, and I chose that because I want to live life not in the fast lane. I'd like to live in the slow lane.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
we travel, we often will take side roads and just try to find. And I think of living life in the slow lane and stopping at little roadside cafes to have a cup of coffee. I mean, that's just kind of the whole reason that I came up with that as a domain name. And I probably will have that until I am no longer here. So,
And then it will live on.
but that's how that came. Pardon
Yeah.
me?
As in then it will live on even when you're not around anymore.
Yeah,
For other people to be
maybe
inspired.
so. I hope so.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
Maybe so.
I'm sure it will be. Well, thanks so much, Andy. This was a lovely conversation. I really enjoyed it. I knew it was going to be a good one. That's why I pushed you to do it. And so I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much for everything you do on the Mycelium network. It's great to have you as part of our community. We really appreciate you, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're most welcome, and I am happy to be part of the community. It's been very rewarding for me, so I've been enjoying it. Look forward to being able to participate even more in the future.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a lovely rest of your day.
You too now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mycelium Network podcast. If you're not already, please subscribe, star, and leave a review for us in your podcatcher of choice. This helps others find us and helps us make a better podcast for you, our listeners. You can also find and follow us on Twitter at Network Mycelium and join the community on Discord. All the links are available in the show notes.